Sleeping bees. I think that's the sweetest thing. I had to get a shot of this because I'm over here collecting some seed in the dahlias, and I had noticed that there are so many bees sleeping in the dahlias. They're just all over the place. Look, it's so funny. Look at that, there's another one. I bet there's 30 bees in here. I'm gonna go to sleep right there in the flower petals. Isn't that funny? Sleeping in the pollen. It's just so cute. Another one. Another one. Another one. There's two over here. There's two over here. There's one here, one here, one here, one here, one here. Like I said, I bet there's 30 or 40 bees sleeping in the flowers. Look at this. There's two here. Oh, that one woke up. There's one here, another one. There's two in that flower, one in that flower, over here, two, three snuggled up in that flower. There's another one, another one, another one. It's about 6 o'clock in the evening, and I think these little workers are ready to go to sleep. I also see a lot of bees taking naps. And these Georgia sunflowers. These are just amazing sunflowers. Look at all these little critters. They're perennial sunflowers. I've talked about them before. They get about 10 feet tall. They don't even bloom until early October. And when they do, they have so many flowers on each stem. Branching stems. And they are such a wonderful sight to see when the rest of the garden seems to be going to sleep. The only thing going to sleep here in this patch of flowers are the bees. We have some of the last flowers of the season here in late October. These beautiful, modest Georgia sunflowers, which is a perennial sunflower, which grows extremely tall. I love pairing them with the elegant, beautiful David Austin rose here, called the Poet's Wife. And they are such fragrant roses here, and such elegance paired with this modesty here. Very lovely. Greetings from Hopalong Hollow. I am sitting here today making a few frogs because I got an order for a felted frog. I've never made a felted frog before, to be honest with you, so this is a learning experience for me. So usually when I do felting, I'll make at least three creatures at the same time, so that I can really get the hang of making the creature, especially if I haven't ever done it before. But I figured since I'm sitting here making frogs, I like to do a little research on frogs, and I just happen to love frogs. I think frogs and turtles are excellent little creatures. So as I do this bit of felting here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about frogs, some interesting facts about them. Now, whenever I'm working on a creature, I try to get as much reference material as possible. So I've got a lot of illustrations here. I've actually got a great skeleton. It's actually made of plastic, so it's not a real frog skeleton, but it's pretty accurate. And it's very helpful in looking at the anatomy of the frog. So I've got a lot of things going on at the table, and I've also got a lot of reference books from frogs that I love. As I'm working on this piece, I wanted to tell you a few interesting facts about frogs. And maybe you will learn something new, just like I did as I was working on these pieces. The largest frogs live in West Africa, and they're called the Goliath frog. They can be up to 15 inches and weigh 71 pounds. And the smallest frog is 0.27 inches, the size of a housefly. Can you believe it? Imagine seeing a cute little frog like that. I thought tree frogs were very small, but when I found out about this fly, that's pretty amazing. Frogs live everywhere in the world except Antarctica. And there are over 6,000 species of frogs. A group of frogs is called an army, whereas a group of toads is called a knot. Now, toads really are frogs. The difference between them is that toads have dry, warty skin and shorter hind legs. Also, toads have no teeth, whereas frogs do have teeth in their upper jaw. The only purpose of those teeth, they really can't bite with them, is to hold down their food before they swallow it. And it's an interesting thing about how they swallow their food. Frogs cannot swallow their food with their eyes open. The anatomy of the frog doesn't allow it to keep its eyes open and swallow prey at the same time. And it's the eyes that help push the food down the throat as they close their eyes. I thought that was pretty interesting. When winter comes calling, frogs do not leave the area. They simply burrow underground or under the mud and hibernate. Actually, some frogs can freeze almost completely solid over the winter and then thaw out when spring comes, perfectly invigorated and fine. After their long winter's nap, the frogs and toads wake up and they head to the nearest water source. So they might even already be in a water source, such as this little pond here in front of my house. It's a very small one. And then we have a larger one actually in the back of the house. And you can certainly tell when the frogs wake up because they start to sing. And then it is so noisy, it can almost be deafening. And that's how the female toads and the frogs meet them, and they breed from there. Now, the female lays her eggs outside the body, and the male does not fertilize them until they have been laid outside of her body. Those thousands and thousands of eggs will appear in long strings, which sort of dangle and sway in the water. And then, of course, what hatches from those eggs are the little fish-like tadpoles, which everybody is familiar with. Most of the vocalizing you're going to hear from frogs will be their mating calls, which can be a cacophony of song, especially in early spring where it can be almost deafening. But they're also known to give distress calls, alarm calls, and rain calls as well. Now, when frogs expand their throat, and it looks like a big bubble right there underneath their chin, like a bulging bubble bump, it's actually the vocal sac found on the males. And expanding it like that allows them to make their voices louder, to call for females. And it's also a way to scare away another male from their territory. Just like many animals, which will stand up straighter or puff up their bodies, this is just also another way to keep away predators, to seem more intimidating to the enemy. When frogs and toads get bigger and older, they begin to shed their skin. Just like many reptiles shed their skin, snakes, lizards. But with a toad you will not find, or a frog, you will not find that skin lying in the garden or on the grass, because when the toad molts and the frog molts, they actually eat their skin afterwards. Yuck. But after they've molted, They have an entirely nice, smooth new skin, and they look fresh and young again. Some frogs will play dead to keep a predator from eating them, because many predators will not eat dead prey. The ability of the frog to leap 20 times the length of their body gives them a lot of protection, as well as padded feet and webbed feet and camouflage. Actually, these amphibians actually have very few predators, and that's because their skin is sometimes toxic with an unpleasant taste, and the only other animal that can eat them with immunity are snakes. We're talking about things here that live in the water. I want to show you this. Viola, puppy, brought this to me today. This is a really great turtle shell that she must have found it on the creek bank or in the water. But I love these things. Who knows how long it's been there. Pretty good sized turtle there. Frogs have 180-degree vision. They're able to spot their prey or predator without ever turning their head around. How they're able to sit so still in the water. Frogs do not actually drink water through their mouth. They absorb water through their skin while sitting in a puddle of water or sitting in the rain. Makes you wonder why they have such a big, wide mouth, such as they do. I mentioned before, frogs can leap a great distance, but toads do not leap. They have shorter legs, and they actually walk or hop. That's generally what I find around here, are toads hopping across the grass, usually at dusk. Because they do not like the heat, they will generally hide in the tall grasses or under leaves during a hot day and then come out in the evening or in the rain. And if I ever find them, I take them and put them in my garden because they're great for controlling slugs and other unwanted guests that you might have eating your plants. So it's always great to have a frog in your garden. Well, it took quite a few days to get this far with the frogs. But they're nearly done. They need a little bit of refining on their faces and their skin and their spots, their markings. And then they'll need to be dressed, of course, in bonnets and hats and top coats. In fact, it took so long I had to replace my bouquet of flowers on the table, as you can see here. We'll probably have to come back in the next video to show these frogs completely finished and dressed in all their finery. In the meantime, let's move on to the frog in literature. I think it's because of the special attributes of the frog and its comical appearance that it has appeared so often in children's literature. In fact, I have added a lot of frogs in my own books, but I wanted to show you a couple of my favorite frogs in children's books and some that my kids really loved when they were young. You may be familiar with a lot of these frogs, especially this one. If you're a Beatrix Potter fan, The Tale of Mr. Jeremy Fisher is a wonderful little book. And very funny, as always. Only Beatrix Potter, using her beautiful illustrative style and her witty storytelling. The Tale of Jeremy Fisher is about a frog, or a toad I should say, that goes fishing one day, only to have a very dangerous and frightening encounter with a giant trout. Of course, you'll have to read the story to see what happens here. But this is one of my favorite Beatrix Potter tales, and I'm sure that your children would love it, and so would you if you have a childlike sense of humor, as I do. Another great artist at the same time as Beatrix Potter, who doesn't get a whole lot of credit, was Ernest Arras, and he had a completely different style than Beatrix Potter. Ernest Arras probably came out with as many books as Beatrix Potter did in the same time period, but I think to this day he's not as well known. Well, very few artists are as well known as Beatrix Potter. His style was quite different, more comical and looser, but just actually very funny, a very funny style. And the frog in this book is Frankie. I would love to do a series on different illustrators of that time period because I have a huge collection of storybooks. And of course I love storybook illustration from all sorts of artists. And so one day I think that would make a great series. Looking into the artwork of different illustrators, because there were so many that really were good. Now, these illustrations are a lot more primitive, but my kids loved these books. Frog and Toad are friends, and these are just funny. I mean, it's kind of like a dry sense of humor in these books. And the illustration, as you can see, is very, well, I sort of call it a more primitive illustration style. It's certainly not a beautiful illustration style, but I do know this. My children and myself loved reading Frog and Toad books. Another book here that I've got on the table, the illustrator is Maggie Neen, one of my favorite English illustrators. Many of the Froggy facts that I read to you today came from this book, Toad on the Road, and her style is quite soft and gentle and delicate and moody. Very atmospheric, I think. She's got her style is very atmospheric and gentle and soft. And absolutely fun. Look at this. They are so funny. I have really come to love frogs even more since I've been illustrating or felting these frogs. I'm going to go to one of my own books because I love to put frogs in my own illustrations as well. Also, in Hopalong Jack and the Blue Bunnies, I wanted to capture the good-natured fun of the frogs, in addition to their habits and lifestyle. In the Journey of Bushki Bottom, we have a lot of frogs hopping across the pages. I didn't realize how many frogs I had put in here till I came back and looked at this book. One of the main characters in this book, or one of the characters, is Hector the Frog and his friend Louie. In fact, Hector does have a lot to say about fine dining. Bugs for breakfast, slugs for lunch, grasshopper pudding with a crunchy crunch. Hector's pantry is stacked quite high, with 6-legged delicacies and caterpillar pie. Lunch is at noon. Please stop by. This brings us to a famous children's classic, The Wind in the Willows. One of the main characters in this book is a rather overbearing, vain, and excitable toad, but still endearing. And so we're going to look through the pages of this book because it has been illustrated by over 90 illustrators since its first publication in 1908. And it's a book that I collect. I collect it because I love the story. And if you've read it, I'm sure you love it too. But I collect it because it's been illustrated by some of the most wonderful illustrators, some of my very favorite artists. So I wanted to just go through a couple of these copies, talk a little bit about the book, and show you some of the great illustrations that have been done over the years. The author, Kenneth Grahame, had quite a struggle getting the book published because publishers couldn't quite see the relevance of a book entirely dedicated to the lives, adventures, and friendships of 4 riverbank animals. But it actually is the friendships and adventures and the rich personalities of the characters in the book that make it so endearing to generations of readers. In fact, it really does have relevance today because it's got sort of a sweet nostalgia about it. It just tugs at your heart. I think it's pretty interesting as well that when the story was first published in 1908, the first edition had only one illustration, and it actually had nothing to do with the story because it was simply two cherubs staring into a creek bank or a river bank, which had nothing to do with Ratty, Mole, Badger, and Toady, the four main characters in this book. Particular copy, by Ernest Shepard, was published in 1959. The illustrations of Ernest Shepard of Winnie the Pooh fame. Of course, we all know Winnie the Pooh illustrations. And he did the illustrations in pen and ink and watercolor. And if you are familiar with his work, you know that it's kind of a loose style, not really tight. Most of the illustrations are the pen and ink, but the soft, muted colors in the watercolor are absolutely charming. The next copy that I want to show you was illustrated by Helen Ward, and I absolutely love her illustration. She's a British illustrator. Hers was published in 2000. I love her unique, stylized look. The colors are muted and yet, in a way, still very vibrant. Look at how fun these are, but just look at the animals, the horse. This scene with a little village. Wonderful illustration. The characters in this book are, as I said before, Ratty and Mole, who are very sweet and tender characters. Badger, who's a rather sophisticated character who lives in a very cozy home deep, deep, deep in the wood. And Toady, who is a very boisterous, exuberant, but very vain and selfish toad. Robert Inkpen. Look at these illustrations. These are stunning and unique. Beautiful work. I don't even know how to describe his work. Whether soft and sort of dreamlike illustration. Just would you not love to go down this stairway and enter into this cozy, cozy little room. Look at that. Notice the moodiness of each one of these illustrations. One of my favorite scenes, this is in Badger's house. Look at this great, great house that he's got. What fun it would be to illustrate this. Of course, there have been so many that have already done it. I don't think I could ever do it justice. I'll just illustrate my own books. This copy has been illustrated by Eric Kincaid. Our colors are a lot brighter. Our characters are a lot funnier and more comical. The bad guys in The Wind in the Willows are the weasels. As you can well imagine, they create havoc all throughout the riverbank. I used to read this to my boys. I used to read this to myself. I'm due for another reading of this. In fact, it might be fun just to read it online. So this artist, I know, there's one thing I love to illustrate. Stairways with lights and lanterns and shadows. I love doing that kind of work. As well as woodlands and water. This book was illustrated in the year 1986. Inga Moore, another wonderful illustrator, soft and muted. I believe she works in ink and watercolor. that. Oh, isn't that wonderful? You can get an idea of the sweetness of the atmosphere and of a sense of the story just by looking at these illustrations. I can't imagine this having been published for over 100 years continually. It has been in publication ever since the first time in 1908. But without the illustrations, if you don't have a vivid imagination, without the illustrations, I don't think that would have happened. It's because of the artists. Artists just can bring a story alive. It isn't just the words of a story. It's the illustration. I've always said that you can have a great story. If it's a children's book, you can have a great story, but you've got to have great illustration to go with it. I think it's not only that this is a great story, but for an artist, the desire to illustrate this book is one of the reasons, I think, because you get to depict all these different seasons and all these different exteriors and interiors in 4 different homes. And the interiors would be so much fun to do because Ratty, Badger, and Mole, they all live underground in cozy little burrow-type homes. But Toady lives in a marvelous manor house. And very elegant. The next artist is Don Daly, who has a very exuberant style. Very adventuresome and active, I think. Here you can see the weasels invading Frog's domain. I think what I like about his style is it's not realism, it's kind of a combination between realistic and whimsical. My favorite copy, illustrated by Michael Haig in the 1980s, and you can see probably that this is something I refer to often by all my little index tags here because I absolutely love his work, and he's been a big inspiration on my work as well because I love his style. I don't think I have to tell you what I love about it. You can see the beauty. Look at the atmosphere in this room. Look at the personality on the little faces of the mice. Look at the costumes. Look at that starry night on the riverbank. I referred to this book so many times when I'm doing illustrations, not to copy his illustration because I can't copy somebody else's work, but what I can do is get inspired by their style and the way they're able to portray a particular feeling, an atmosphere, a place, a time. And it's very nostalgic for me to look at this kind of art. And that's the kind of art I try to do myself. Now, those are the only copies. Those are the copies that I own. There are several illustrators that also did this book that I don't have their work. That would be Tasha Tudor did this book. Arthur Rackman, very famous illustrator. It was the last book he ever illustrated. I don't have a copy of his either. But if you're interested in the illustrators of The Wind and the Willows and in the book itself, this is a great one for you to get because it's called The Illustrators of The Wind and the Willows. If you haven't read the book, please get a copy. This is great for adults. It's for children. It's for anybody who has a sense of history, a sense of humor, and a sense of nostalgia. This is a wonderful book to read on a nice cold winter night with a cup of cocoa or a hot cup of tea. But if you're interested in more things about books, illustrations, illustrators, I have so many I'd love to share with you. So I hope that you learned something today that you'd never heard of before, possibly about those fun facts about frogs. Maybe you never heard of the illustrators that I mentioned or some of these books, and perhaps you'll look into them. I do recommend Wind in the Willows. It's such a great, great story and such a great classic. So for now, I think I better get busy finishing up my little green friends. They still have some work that needs to be done on their faces and on their skin. And then they all need to be dressed. So we'll see you next time when everybody is fully clothed and looking dandy. From Hopalong Hollow, this is Jerry, and bye-bye.